This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 69, How Fascinating is Your Content? Part 6, Vice. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is May 1st, 2014. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for episode number 69 of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. That means you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your smartphone or your iPod or your listening device of choice. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. In last week's podcast, we continued our series called How Fascinating is Your Content, based on Sally Hogshead's groundbreaking marketing book, Fascinate, Your 7 Triggers to Persuasion and Captivation. And what we've been doing is talking about the 5th of these 7 fascination triggers, which was power. Now, if you happen to miss that episode, feel free to click on over to iTunes or to Stitcher or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. So that brings me to today's topic. Today we are continuing our How Fascinating is Your Content series by tackling the 6th of Sally Hogshead's fascination triggers, and that is Vice. But first, let's check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Today we've got something new out of Google. Google Analytics is now reporting data from both web and mobile apps in a single report. Now, I don't need to tell you that mobile is becoming increasingly important as a content delivery vehicle, and now Google is kind of validating that by giving mobile equal status with the web in those Google Analytics report. It used to be a separate report for traffic from mobile devices, but now it's all in one. And just to be clear, you can still view those sources separately. You would just set up a filter to customize what you see, but for the convenience of looking at everything together, they are now combined into a single report. Good for you, Google. Also, some news out of LinkedIn. LinkedIn is now allowing uploading of photos from its mobile app. And I was happy to see this because LinkedIn has really come a long way in recognizing the importance of visual content, even in the hyper-professional environment that is LinkedIn. Because for the longest time, no role was seen for visuals in this platform. It's like, what are we going to share, stupid cat pictures, like, or we're going to share Pinterest crafts on LinkedIn? Of course not. But last year it released the function of uploading images via the desktop app, and now we're going to be able to snap photos from our mobile devices, Android or iPhone, and upload them via the LinkedIn app. So this is great news for, let's say, posting from conferences, from professional events. You can snap photos to give people an insider's view of your organization, your team at work on something. Also, it's an opportunity to show your work. So say if you're an interior decorator, you can snap some photos from your latest creation and share them with all of your LinkedIn contacts. So really good development over at LinkedIn. Okay, for our content hit of the week, I'm sharing with you a great blog post I just found. It's called Why Facebook's Organic Traffic Drop is Good for Your Business. And this was written by Travis Balinas. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's over on the Outbound Engine blog. Now, it's no secret that the reach for organic, that is for unpromoted posts on Facebook, has really tanked over the last 6 months. I know I've seen my reach drop considerably on the posts that I choose not to promote, and we've kind of all come around to the idea that the free ride is over and that if you want something seen on Facebook, then you're going to need to cough up some dollars or euros or pesos or whatever your currency is. And there's been a lot of belly aching about it. And I admit I have been among those grousing right along from the start. They are dragging me kicking and screaming into this pay-to-play model. But in this blog post, Travis actually shows 6 very insightful reasons why this is actually good for business in the long run. Yes, it's going to involve some financial outlay, but he makes some very good points about why this is good in the long run. So very good read, and I highly recommend it. Again, that title is Why Facebook's Organic Traffic Drop is Good for Your Business. And I will provide that link in the blog post. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you happen to stumble across a news item that you think would be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so we can share, and I will provide that contact information at the end of the podcast. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, How Fascinating is Your Content? Part 6, Vice. Today we're continuing our series based on Sally Hogshead's book Fascinate, Your 7 Triggers to Persuasion and Captivation. And if you're just joining us, let me give you a little bit of background. So what Sally does in this book is she goes through 7 triggers that cause us, and by us I mean human beings, all walks of life, that cause us to become fascinated. Whether that's fascination with a person, with an object, with an experience, with an idea, fascinated with pretty much anything. And it is truly a fascinating book, pun intended. And as I was reading it, I really got to think about how we can apply these fascination triggers to our work as content marketers. So today we'll be discussing the 6th fascination trigger that Sally talks about, and that is vice. Now, vice is, simply put, the forbidden fruit. So if we're looking at 2 paths to take, and one involves eating healthy, going to the gym, getting 8 hours of sleep, saying please and thank you, and following all those other supposed tos that surround us, then vice is the other path. It's skipping the gym, it's eating that 32,000 calorie cheeseburger, etc., etc. And let me quote here from the book. Sally writes, quote, "The devil sitting on your shoulder, whispering in your ear, he's whispering vice. When we're told we can't have something, this trigger of fascination can take hold and make us want more. Rules are not fascinating, but bending them very much so." So another perspective on vice is the guilty pleasure, like that gossip website you might visit every day but would never admit to enjoying, at least to anyone whose respect you're hoping to maintain. So that's another perspective on vice. So what Sally does here is she gives us 4 pillars of vice that marketers can leverage. And again, this is the book is very much a general marketing book, and we're going to get into how we as content marketers can adapt them here in a bit. So the first pillar that she talks about is to create taboos. So think about how many female celebrities were barely on the radar until all of a sudden this sex tape comes out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they are rocketed to superstardom. Or another example would be the reality stars. When they put together reality shows, everyone's striving to be the bad one, to be the one that you love to hate. And Sally gives a very specific example of vice as a fascination trigger, which came about when Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps was photographed in 2009 smoking from a bong. Now, in the photo, one can clearly see a very high-end Omega wristwatch around the wrist of the famous swimmer. And you'd think that the Omega Corporation would be horrified by this, right? Well, on the contrary, as a spokesman for the company put it, you just can't buy this kind of product placement. And that photo was circulated everywhere, and that watch was seen by millions of people as a result of this Vice-related story. The second pillar she talks about is leading others astray. In other words, temptation into sin. Okay. And of course, one of the masters of this tactic is the city of Las Vegas, with its famous tagline, "What happens in Vegas," come on, you know the words, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." And that's all they have to say. They just let your lurid imagination do the rest. But another example that Sally talks about is the TV show Gossip Girl, which was actually in danger of being canceled in its early months because the ratings were so low. And that was the case until the network started using headlines like, quote, "A parent's worst nightmare," unquote, and here's my favorite, quote, "mind-blowingly inappropriate," unquote, to promote the show. And sure enough, millions flocked over to see what all the fuss was about. And yes, many did stick around to become loyal viewers. The third pillar she talks about is to define absolutes. In other words, come right out and say that something is forbidden. You know, don't you dare do this. And Sally gives the hypothetical example of, let's say you and I were in a laboratory together and I put a black box in front of you with the very clear instructions, whatever you do, do not open this box. And then I walked out of the room. Now, the question is, how fascinating does that box become as soon as I tell you under no circumstances should you open it? If you're like most people, it becomes very fascinating indeed. And the fourth pillar of vice is to, as she puts it, give a wink. So Sally defines this pillar as disrupting perceptions and forcing reevaluations. So if you look specifically at what she calls challenger brands, and these would be smaller companies who are up against just huge established monoliths in their industry. These smaller guys, these underdogs, have the luxury of being able to be a little scrappy and to fly in the face of expectations and really challenge the status quo. And you know, Sally gives some great examples, but I'm going to toss in my own here, and that is my oh-so-beloved South Park. Now, as many of you know, I'm an avid South Park fan, have been since the beginning, and I think part of the reason it has been such a success from its earliest episodes is that South Park came along, believe it or not, in 1996. I know, it's been ages. Doesn't seem like that long. But it came along in 96, exactly when the, quote, political correctness movement was starting to reach its peak, and people were really starting to get sick of it. So in an environment where people were almost afraid to open their mouths at all for fear of offending someone, here was a show that blatantly set out to offend as many people as possible and as often as possible. And, you know, over the past going on 18 years now, yes, I have seen all the episodes, and I can hardly think of a single hot button issue that South Park has not just charged headlong into. From racism to the war in Iraq to Scientology to depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. I mean, wherever anyone might say, don't go there, they've gone there. And, you know, I recently saw an interview with the creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. And Trey Parker made the comment that it's gotten to a point where if someone were to say, oh man, I saw something on South Park that was really offensive, they would get some really funny looks. Because, you know, it's like saying I went to McDonald's and they wanted to sell me a hamburger. It is such a part of their brand that, you know, that in-your-face irreverence, that no one's surprised by it anymore. And in spite of that, they still manage to keep the brand going strong after all these years. So those are the four, what Sally calls pillars that marketers can leverage to trigger the vice trigger. So how can we as content marketers leverage this trigger? And this is kind of dicey because, you know, as content marketers, our mission in life is to be helpful and to, you know, present things that our audience really needs. So how does vice work into that? So a couple of examples. One thing we can do is kind of with a wink, acknowledge our content as a guilty pleasure that may often be enjoyed in lieu of something that is more virtuous. So to give you an example, here in the States, we just wrapped up the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament. Actually, it's been over for about a month now, but it's a massive basketball tournament, and games are being played during the day as well as evenings throughout the period of the tournament. Now, what the NCAA does is they provide streaming video of all the games. So no matter what time the game is played, they provide streaming video. And for those who dare to watch these games while they're at work, supposed to be being productive, the NCAA included on each video page an extra feature called the boss button. Now, what is the boss button? Well, if you click on this innocuous looking little boss button, it takes you to a very generic looking presentation file that might appear on any worker's computer desktop, which of course is just what you would want the boss to see when he or she pops up in your cubicle while you happen to be watching a basketball game at work. Hush, hush. So what the NCAA is saying here, and I think it's brilliant, what they're saying is, look, we know you're going to be watching these games when you're supposed to be working, and guess what? We're going to help you get away with it. Okay? How is that for cheeky? And of course, it's brilliant. I wonder how many extra viewers they got because of that boss button. Really, really cheeky. So, if your audience is likely to be taking in your content when they're supposed to be doing something else, like working, for example, then playing that up in a judicious manner might help you tap into that vice trigger. Another way we can tap into vice is to just be irreverent. So in other words, to be the South Park of your industry, to go against conventional wisdom, which as we all know is frequently neither conventional nor particularly wise, and to fly in the face of expectations, whatever those expectations happen to be. And I found a great example of this a few weeks ago. So one of our clients has an audience that is primarily composed of parents of young children. So we share a lot of content that has to do with parenting. And recently I was shopping for some shareable content for them to share on Facebook, and I came across a blog post by a mom blogger named Bunmi Latidan, and I hope I'm not butchering her name here. If so, I'm sorry. And the title of the post was, "I'm done making my kids' childhood magical." And what she talks about in this post is how parents are under tremendous pressure to have their kids' rooms professionally decorated with Pottery Barn furniture and decor, to dress their little ones in coordinated designer outfits, to spend their spare time on these elaborate Pinterest-worthy crafts projects, to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on these lavish birthday parties, etc., etc. And what Bunmi wrote in this blog post was just saying enough. And she went on to say, we don't need to make childhood magical. It already is, and all this extra trimming is not going to make our kids any happier or any better adjusted. And then she goes on to talk about her own childhood. And she said, I can't remember ever making crafts with my parents. And we did not have special Christmas jammies from the Gap or wherever. But in spite of having a very simple existence, she treasures those childhood memories because it wasn't the dressing around them. It was the feeling she got from being in a very warm, loving family. So what happened to this post is it went absolutely viral. And I just clicked over to it. It got 719,000 likes on Facebook. It generated 93 comments, and it was emailed 1,700 times. And what Bunmi was doing in this blog post was she was pulling a South Park. She was expressing what many parents were thinking, but probably did not want to express for fear of being thought of as a bad parent. So this is a good example of tapping into that vice trigger by just being tweaking the nose of the status quo. So as content marketers, we can think about ways that we can do that in our own industries. Where can you shake things up? Where can you be the gadfly that snaps someone out of their comfort zone and makes them question that all-important status quo? And I'd be willing to bet there's probably at least one issue where you can do that, and creating some content around it might just turn some heads. So that's my take on how we as content marketers can begin to tap into the fascination trigger of vice. If you have any questions about today's Spotlight segment, or if you want to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you, and I will provide that contact information at the end of the podcast. Next week, we will actually wrap up our series based on Sally Hogshead's book, Fascinate, Your 7 Triggers to Persuasion and Captivation, with the 7th and final of these triggers, and that is trust. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. For today's tip, I want to talk about repurposing content on a SlideShare. Now, if you are a regular listener to this podcast, you probably know that I am a huge fan of SlideShare. It is my secret weapon of choice. And especially if you're in a B2B industry, you really owe it to yourself to check it out and start using it. I just pulled up the latest numbers. SlideShare.net? Yes. Has a page rank of 8, which is tremendous. It has gotten 130 million page views, and it racks up an average of 60 million monthly visitors. So just a tremendous destination, tremendously popular destination on the web. And I think you'll find it worth your time and effort to look at some existing pieces of content and see if you can repurpose those as SlideShare decks. So for example, if a blog post was particularly successful, you can create some slides around it and create a SlideShare. Or if it's a webinar, you might want to break it up into chunks and save those chunks as little kind of bite-sized pieces that you can share on SlideShare. Now, a word of warning, if you charge money for the webinar, you're going to want to edit it pretty judiciously, because what you don't want to do is take something that you charge people money for, put it out there for free, and that might not sit well for those who actually pay the price of admission. So just a caveat there. But do look into SlideShare, especially for repurposing that content. You can also upload video if you have a pro account. So those YouTube videos, you can absolutely re-upload those to SlideShare, get some additional traffic out of those. And it really is one of the top destinations for people who are seeking out quality content. And getting in on that game will go a long way towards growing your content marketing footprint. Okay, campers, that is it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review on iTunes. I would so appreciate it. For more information about content marketing, you're welcome to visit our blog at resonancecontent.com/blog, where you'll also find links to our pages on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and other social networks. If you'd like to email me a question to cover in our tip of the week, you can contact me anytime at rachel@resonancecontent.com. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from the author Edgar Rice Burroughs. He once said, quote, "I have been successful probably because I have always realized that I knew nothing about writing and have merely tried to tell an interesting story entertainingly." Unquote. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.